Seth. Sex. Pardon me. Sex. Epistemology. Theology. Health. Sex, epistemology, theology, health. Sex. I guess sex is the thematic term. Epistemology. That there can be no sexual morality because the epistemic crisis renders us nihilist. That's number one. Theological, because we still interpret sex in theological terms. And finally, my proposal that in a society that does not actually take seriously its own theology and the sexual mores that theology axiomatizes, moral problems abound. The relationship between theology and sex is supposed to be a clarification, not a complication. We have, many of us, our doubts about how much theology actually exists in the United States. Because there are plenty of card-carrying atheists such as myself who are also card-carrying religious nuts. You know, it's as though, like, look, if you're a scholar of religion, you could very well be from any religious tradition. Including atheism. If you want to be a real atheist, you have to know a fuck ton about theology. So then if you know a fuck ton about theology, does that mean that you're still an atheist? I always find that question truly puzzling. Now, if you talk to a born-again Christian, you know, they'll probably look at you like you're crazy. Because for certain Christians that are less oriented around traditional institutional pomp and ritual, aka orthodoxy and orthodoxy and Catholicism, right? Scratch that. Retract. There's a split, of course. You have Martin Luther. Martin Luther takes theology from ritualistic, pomp and circumstance, the word of the elites and the intellectuals, and he says, no, look, actually, you're paying bribes. The priests are asking for bribes in order that your destiny and eternity go a little bit easier on you. And plenty of the elites, they pay the bribe to the Catholic Church. This is the origins of Protestantism, right? I don't know if you call it bribe, but these days the word bribe is alive and well, especially in what has become, for the time being anyway, a thoroughgoingly transactionalized culture by way of dear leader. So now, considering all these scattershot swipes at the canvas, let's tarry with the question of our theology. What is our theology as Americans? Catholic, institutional. Orthodox, institutional. And when I say institutional, I mean there's costumes. There's costumes, and then there's de jure rules for the church. So that's an institution. The patriarch or the metropolitan or the pope, cardinals, bishops, however it works, the law comes down from on high. It's mediated through religious professionals. It gets transcribed by the holy scribes, right? The holy lackeys, the holy court recorders, right? And it's churned out into a worldwide universal scheme of law, de jure Catholic law, right? The same in South America as in Vaticano, and the same as in Malaysia and Moscow. You're a Catholic, you're a Catholic, you're a Catholic. It doesn't work that way for the Protestants. Protestants, upon which most American culture, I think, from the perspective of immigration comes many Protestants. Scots Irish, Swedenborg. I don't know where Swedenborg fits into the church, or if he even does. Kierkegaard? No, that's self-indulgent. Not Kierkegaard. Distrust of the elites. Immediately in the kernel of the American ethos, you have distrust of elites. But elites wrote the Constitution. So in the founders, the so-called deism, D-E-I-S-M, D-E-I-I-S-M, deism. It's kind of like DEI-ism, right? Isn't that interesting that the founders were wealthy elites preaching DEI-ism, expounding de jure law conditioned by immense learning. Theologically, perhaps little more than mechanical and perfunctory. Look, okay, well, the argument, I suppose, if you're blood and soil, blood and soil, whatever, Mayflower Pilgrims American, I guess you probably go way pre-1776, and you're probably not really even into the founders then. You're probably like into something pre-founders. Is that the idea for blood and soil enthusiasm? It's pre-founders? Because like I don't really see how a blood and soil ideologue could be into the American founders, because the whole thing is front to back elitism. So if it looks these days, coming from the side of MAGA, that they don't look so very much into the Constitution, how's that for a half-baked shot in the dark? They're not into the Constitution, MAGAs, because they don't like elites. Elites wrote the Constitution. So from the perspective of MAGA, it could very well be actually that the founders are bunk. The reality for the founders, look, if you follow this line of argument, it goes something like this. I'm just taking shots in the dark. Blind swipes, I don't know. A big bunch of like Protestant white people show up in this new land. Quod erat demonstrandum. Blood and soil Americanism, or blood and soil nativism prior to the Declaration, after the Magna Carta. I suppose you got to deal with that one, but I suppose if it's under the picture that I'm describing, you got a big group of white people coming over on early boats. How much is the Magna Carta on their mind? I don't know. So, and I guess I should know more about the blood and soil nativist nationalist thesis, if there is one. But one thing that I think it's safe to say is that, because I know from experience and from my own background, but also from what I've learned and from what I've experienced from Protestants, is that Protestants are just as uptight about sex as Catholics or Orthodox are. In fact, almost all straightforwardly religious people that I know are massively uptight about sex. And quite far from treating sex as though it's strictly a health-related question. And because of this, my theory is that 95% of Americans literally are sexually unwell. Not because of perversions, because they're not getting laid. And probably overall, we're so out of touch with our sexuality, we don't even know what it feels like to get laid or what the process looks like. What regular sex looks like from a medical and health perspective. Forget the theology. The theology, apropos sex, is bunk. That's vestigial. It's rinsed. It's gone by the board. It's total crash out logic. Absolute dead end. You never get anywhere making sex into something theological or religious. Absolutely not. You know why? Because the religious touches the furthest limit of your core intimacy. And if you expose that, and you integrate that with the life of another person's sloppy, wet genitalia, you've got an immediate kind of synthetic fusion of absolute interiority. And if you don't trust that person, you are hurting yourself. Not maybe you'll hurt yourself. You might hurt yourself. No, you are hurting yourself if you're fucking somebody and you don't trust them. But how are you going to trust them? Because there's no trust in the United States. We destroyed discourse long time ago. You can't trust anybody if you can't trust your own concepts, because you don't believe in any of them. And I have verified with hundreds of videos on my YouTube channels, Americans do not believe in any of the concepts they apparently know. And the proof is right here. How many Americans are standing up for the U.S. Constitution from a theoretical standpoint? 0. Not 0. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Joanne Freeman, Heather Cox Richardson. Give me some other good academics. Who's doing the Lord's work here? Bill Crystal, pretty good. Different category. Just trying to give some examples of what I consider to be noble dignified work worthy of an American right now on the 5th of February 2026. Once you make the transition from treating sex as though it's a psychoanalytic or religious matter, and that it is strictly a question of what gets you off, verify it experimentally, right? So you yourself experiment with what gets you off. The reason I can speak like this is because I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life to sexual experimentation. Because I'm not a smooth guy, and I don't know how to seduce women, except, if all of the astrology and the biorhythms are lined up, and I just literally get completely unjustifiably lucky. It's been known to happen, and I make a tremendous amount of effort all the time, being friendly with and flirting with women, and I try my best because I have robust sex drive. So after living this way, in other words, very proactively, apropos my own sexual health, the development of my own sexual health. Sexuality, for whatever reason, I grew up believing, and we were not really seriously religious people. We were intellectually religious, rationally religious. There was a lot of that going there. I was always taught to equate sex with morality. That the joint experience of those co-constructed intimacies is a sacred matter, it's a serious matter, etc., etc. That's all theological. Even though it's put through a secular filter, that's 100% theological thinking. Go find a woke libtard, and I will find you the most sexually tortured individual, not because they don't know their sexual identity. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Sexual frustration, because nobody knows how to get laid except what? If you know Jeffrey Epstein, right? And all of these thought leaders of society think that they're religious people, so what? Sex is a theological matter for them. And since the world is absolutely untrustworthy, the only way to gain access to the occult, religious, sort of like secret purity of ideal theological sexuality and the limits of metaphysics is through the movie Suspiria, 1970s. The soundtrack is Goblin, right? And the movie Salo by Pasolini, right? Rape and murder as religious ritual by the world's elite. Because of why? The vestigial persistence of sex qua theology, or theology qua sex. Aleister Crowley is theology qua sex. Jesus Christ is sex qua theology. Aleister Crowley teaches the religious ritualization of sex. Well, Jesus Christ teaches a sexualization of religious purity. That's why Jesus Christ, if he had intimate relations with Mary Magdalene, I mean, we hope he did. Dear God, we don't imagine that somebody with that kind of semantico-logical machinery, the relentless drive to teach and to walk with the neighbors in the community, that was an asexual drive, an asexual ethos. No, it's sexuality that is channeled toward morality, not religion. Religious sexuality is when you're Aleister Crowley and Jeffrey Epstein, and you get out a sharp dagger and you draw blood, and then several children are getting raped, and then just as you're ejaculating, the children are sliced open from ear to ear, and all the blood is allowed to drain out of their neck as you're ejaculating into their asshole. That's the sexualization of theology. Les Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein, and whoever else. I don't know if it's Les Wexner. That's just one of the many names that I keep hearing. Oh my God, see, now I have to, oh my God, see, I traumatize myself. Good Lord.